Well, guys, the time has come. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the story that came in Flashpoint, episode 5 of season 3 of The Living World. And this has been an absolutely bonkers patch. For any of those of you who have already played it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The amount of new directions the story could go in as of this patch is huge. This patch actually, to me, feels like the territory of expansion storytelling, and yet they squeezed it in, for better or worse, in an episode of The Living World. That's Flashpoint. There's a huge amount to get through. You guys will recall that for the first 4 episodes of this season, I've covered everything that happened in the story journal in a single video. These mammoth videos that have frequently been well over an hour long. And because I've tried to force them all into one video, we've kind of had to rush through a lot of the finer points. Well, at the end of episode 4, though a few of you might remember I said this, we're going to try a different format this time where we go instance by instance and each instance gets its own video. And I can think of no better reason to do that here than Flashpoint, because there is just so much to get through. So today, let's start peering into the territory of spoilers, be warned, for Flashpoint, starting with the first of the instances. And in upcoming videos, we'll do some of the other bits as well.
Commander, do you read me? Only answer if you're ready to be blown away.
So, the patch starts as oh so many have, and that's with Taimi using her special new communicator. It's really cool to see how much mileage the devs got out of this in this season of The Living World, right? And she tells us that she has finished her dragon machine. So you might already be wondering, wait, what, dragon machine? This is something that was very briefly mentioned at the start of the last patch, just before we got into all the Civil War stuff, where she talked about recovering the heart of Omad's machine from Drytop, something we haven't seen since season 2 of The Living World, built by a genius Asura, and who had kind of tapped into the fundamentals of the eternal alchemy and given us this incredible vision of orbs. Probably the highest point of any of Living World season 2 for me revolved around Omad's machine, and a huge amount of this patch is Omad's machine coming back into the story. So we head off to Ratanovus to see what Taimi has figured out. Remember at this point as well that the story has been setting up that she's running around all the time, she's never giving herself any sleep, any rest, and she's kind of on overdrive, trying to tap into Omad's machine, Ratanovan research on the Elder Dragons that's, 200 years old, and of course all the new information that's more recently been coming out as of the fact that Jormag and Primordus have become very, very active. When we arrive at Ratanovus, another big thing happens for season 3. It's the introduction of a character who hasn't appeared since Heart of Thorns, a really important character to the story. It's Kasmeer!
Hi, Commander. I have a bone to pick with you.
Before I get an earful, I told Marjory it was a terrible idea.
So Kasmeer is here. I know that so many of us thought Kasmeer would be in the last patch where she was most relevant for Kryta, and indeed she does mention to us right here that she's been in Kryta trying to detect lies and ministers and doing things around there. I guess we just never met up with her at any point earlier. I don't know why the devs wrote her into the story this late. Perhaps it was something to do with the voice actress. I guess we really can't know. But one thing I do respect the devs for a lot here with Kasmeer returning is they don't treat it like it's a big deal that she's been gone for a long time. And for us, the players, it's been a year and a half since we've seen Kasmeer because of the content drought after Heart of Thorns, and that can feel like a very long time. But one thing I think is really important to maintain perspective of is the fact that anyone playing this in sequence, going from season 2 into Heart of Thorns into season 3, she's been gone for a bit, sure, but not long enough for it to have become suddenly a big deal, and I really like the way that they treated her reintroduction. One thing I didn't quite like is she has a bone to pick with us for not having invited her to Dragon's Watch yet. Oh, come on, like it's our fault she's not been around in the story when we haven't had that opportunity. But hey, again, maybe for players playing this in sequence, this doesn't feel too weird. They do a bit of a suggestion here as well, that Kasmeer is somehow the rational one of the group, that her rationality is one of her bigger perks, one of her defining character features. This isn't something I've ever really felt from Kasmeer, but maybe this is the way internally the devs think of her, and maybe we the players should start thinking about her when we come to assessing her character later on. But the cool thing is, maybe finally some good news for our crappy little guild we've been building throughout the season. She does agree to join Dragon's Watch. I've said it all before, actually, about Dragon's Watch. I like that it doesn't seem to be going perfectly, that we can't get everyone, that it's not a tacky replacement for Destiny's Edge 2.0, or, a more official name for Destiny's Edge 2.0. I've enjoyed all of this stuff, and the fact that Kasmeer is on side is reasonable enough, I guess, at least.
I warned them. Did they listen? No!
So, moving along with Kasmeer, we find a lot of Asura running around in a scramble because lots of Elder Dragon minions have been released from little testing chambers as Taimi has been experimenting on them and figuring out the way these things consume magic, the way they transform magic perhaps and cipher it, you know, extensions of her research with Spencer from earlier on in the story steps. The ambience is actually really nice. There's lots of cool little details around, especially later on in the instance. You'll notice that a character will get injured later and a small Asuran medic will run over and actually start using a data pad to heal them. There's nice little touches of golems that put out fires later. There's a general quality to this instance that is very typical of Season 3 stuff, and I think that the devs are still hitting a bar that's higher, if not just as high, as Heart of Thorns, and certainly better than the personal story. So all these things are nice. I figured I'd plug them here at the start before we get into the juicy story things. So let's talk about Taimi's new toy. It is Omad's machine. I saw this thing in the trailer. Many of us did before the patch came out. We guessed it could have been her tampering with Omad's machine, and indeed it is. It's the heart of Omad's machine, and then she's done stuff to it, I guess. But when we ask Taimi what the deal is, she explains right off the bat here at the very start that this machine is capable of destroying or eliminating 2 Elder Dragons at once. Oh boy.
I don't want to get too technical on you, so, machine make dragons go, yeah.
I think I can handle a bit more detail.
So I've always been very much in the camp that I'd love to see 2 Elder Dragons get dealt with at once. I think that there's a lot of Elder Dragons, and to formulaically go one by one in a very long line would be a bit rubbish. And so taking 2 out at once is a cool idea that I'm totally in favor of, but I really didn't expect it to be happening so quickly. And I guess what's interesting about this patch is we're suddenly in that moment again. We're having that experience like we had in the personal story where the glory of Tyria came out of nowhere, or we're having that experience that we had in Heart of Thorns where all of a sudden we find out we can enter the dream through Trahearne and this somehow is saving the day. We're in that situation where the devs have to answer the question, how do you deal with the Elder Dragons? And here they've told us that Taimi can deal with the Elder Dragons through the use of her research at Omad's machine. That might not sit very well with you, and particularly on the subreddit recently, a lot of people have been throwing around the term Deus Ex Machina a lot.
はい、授業始めますよ。
I kind of feel partly responsible for this, as this is a bit of a buzzword or a term that I used to describe and criticize very heavily both the core story and Heart of Thorns. And maybe it's not quite so applicable here, but a lot of the discussion on the efficacy and the plausibility of this machine may have to come for a later discussion video where we talk about where this is actually used. But for now, just understand that Taimi thinks she really has found a solution where no other Asura have before her. She has found the solution, and it comes from tampering, not just looking at, but tampering with what the Asura would call the eternal alchemy. So this is pretty huge. This is almost something, if they'd framed it correctly, we could have had a finale. You know, the last episode of the season could have been based around this, and then, you know, an expansion storyline could have been, you know, actually activating the machine or moving it or whatever. Next up, Phlunt arrives. Phlunt's a great character. He's everything that really I love about the Asura. He's cantankerous, he's grumpy, he's self-interested.
Hello, progeny. And how are we ruining science today?
But he's also very smart, and I think this is my favorite patch for Phlunt that Phlunt's ever been in since Guild Wars 2 first came out. And of course, Phlunt did have a little bit of prominence in the personal story as well. So Phlunt comes along. He still has no idea what Taimi's been doing. Taimi has some crappy excuse for what the machine's supposed to be to do with elixir cooling, I believe it is. And she wants him totally out of the lab in case when this machine is activated, everything goes wrong. It's at this point that the mission gives us a very cool moment where we get to play with charm, ferocity, and dignity. So I know a lot of you guys might not want me to talk about this too much because it's not about the deep lore, but this I find awesome, and I have to give kudos to the devs for what they did here. This was one of the really cool little moments. So if you guys don't know what charm, ferocity, and dignity are, they were actually one of the big headline features for Guild Wars 2 in terms of being an RPG back in 2012. They are your ability to speak to characters around the world world in a certain way. Like, you can be ferocious, or you can say something with charm, or you can be, you know, very dignified in the way you approach different situations. And the idea back in 2012 was obviously that they would give you an experience similar to what BioWare does so well, right? If you look at the BioWare RPGs, if you look at stuff like how in Mass Effect we get to choose between Paragon or Renegade, that was essentially what Guild Wars 2 was going for. It had a personality system attached to it as well, where you would have a personality that was given as a result of the number of different choices you chose at different junctures. And as cool as all of this is, and as well as BioWare have proved this can be amazing for RPGs, ArenaNet sucked at it. They didn't do very well, and when I believe Feature Pack 2 came around, they subtly shifted the UI in such a way that the personality stuff was removed, and it's been kind of a weird vestigial aspect of the game ever since. And that's why I love so much what happened here in episode 5, because we had a conversation with Phlunt now, where we got to convince him to leave the lab by choosing either charm, ferocity, or dignity. And unlike in all the other situations of Guild Wars 2 where they messed this up, it actually matters which one you pick, and you don't get to, like, undermine your choice by exiting out of the conversation and then immediately going back in. If you don't do well convincing Phlunt, then he laughs in your face and you don't get to convince Phlunt. Your reward for successfully doing this is you get his password, which is just password and a bit of a funny joke, that gives you extra allies for an upcoming fight in the instance. This is so cool. This is what Guild Wars 2 needs everywhere, really. And then there's some slight other stuff with the personality system. Could have been awesome. The idea is actually, I believe you have to go dignity every time on him specifically. If you try to charm your way past him, he'll see right through you. If you try to be ferocious, he'll, you know, brush you off. Very cool. I'd love to see more of this in the next patch. I'd love to see doing this kind of thing, but with the Norn now, instead of a cantankerous old Asura, and maybe this time being ferocious is what the Norn respect more than anything else. This should be in all the Living World patches, and the expansion stuff coming up, we will have to see. But it's very, very, very cool stuff, and hopefully you guys didn't miss out on that. That's another sign of a bump in quality for Guild Wars 2's ability to deliver story, and I think it's something we should look at.
Okay, everyone, secure your research and start heading through the gate. Field experiments for the rest of the day.
Commander!
Don't forget your anti-shock armaments.
So once we either succeed or fail at getting Phlunt out, and he's left either way, Marjory enters the scene, coming past Phlunt, who's now trying to get out of this Ratanovus via the Asura Gate. So Marjory enters, and so this marks the first time in Season 3 we've had not only Kasmeer on the scene, but Kasmeer and Marjory are together, and so they've got actually a lot to talk about. Obviously, Marjory chose to leave us and tail Lazarus and learn as much as she could because she was suspicious of him, if you remember. And, well, that story of Marjory being around Lazarus comes to a conclusion now. I think that that's a bit of a shame. I was really looking forward to seeing what they could do with Marjory being in Lazarus's shadow, and there was way more untapped potential there. But as of what's about to happen here, we see that really that's all over. Marjory has ran away from Lazarus. She's got away from him, and she thinks that he might be coming here.
He's probably only a few minutes behind me.
Lazarus, or whoever, is coming here? How should we prepare?
And so you have to remember this patch comes off the back of the last, where we realize that Lazarus is an imposter. Marjory is in the know on this also. She explains that Lazarus has been carrying around with him a mirror, so presumably magic mirror. He never lets it out of his sight, and perhaps this is the key to unmasking who he really is. Kasmeer, a proficient mesmer in her own right, explains that mirrors have a very long history with mesmery stuff, and maybe there's some kind of ritual we can do or tactic we can pull off to unmask who Lazarus really is. We set up this plan where we're going to get mirrors and we're going to position them all around the room. Now, conveniently, there are some mirrors here. People have criticized the story, saying, oh, it's so convenient that there are mirrors there for us to use. I really think that that is way too deep of a nitpick. Does it matter if there are mirrors around? I mean, really, we're in an Asuran lab. They could magically manufacture something if they really had to. And don't forget, this is Ratanovus too. Ratanovus deep below the surface of Tyria that is lit from fiber optic tubes that carry light from the surface, reflecting and bouncing down there. The idea that there would be no mirrors around, or we have to go to a lot more busy work to get them, is kind of arbitrary, no? So I haven't really understood that criticism of the story since it came out. But we find these mirrors, we put them into position, and knowing that Lazarus is on his way to this lab, we make this plan to trap him. Just before we go on a little, I do want to touch on this idea of mirrors and mesmery stuff, because it does seem quite interesting to me. I feel like the idea that Lazarus always had a mirror alongside him should have been set up a long time ago. We should have seen a mirror alongside him either on his first appearance in the story or in his second, or there should have been something. I think it was far too late for them to introduce the mirror thing here if they knew that this was where they were going with the story. But as to the idea of mirrors being related to mesmery stuff, this is actually a really good fit. Those of you guys that don't know me very well, I used to play a Mesmer in GW1. Lissa is kind of my favorite goddess for that reason. I love the area of Varby in Elona where there is a giant lake called the Mirror of Liss. I've always been a big fan of all this mesmery style stuff, and it is quite innate to that profession. I mean, hell, even if you look in Guild Wars 2, isn't one of their heal skills called Mirror, or is that one of their traits that means you reflect while you heal? There's a lot of stuff like that about illusion, about reflection, and I think that it was cool for them to pair this stuff together. So as we travel around the room to get these mirrors, Marjory and Kasmeer take a moment to catch up with one another because it has been a long time.
I wasn't looking for anything in particular.
Next time, maybe consult your girlfriend before throwing yourself in the lion's den.
The commander tried to stop me too. Didn't work out so well.
This isn't about permission.
It's almost an arbitrary conversation to me. It feels like a conversation these characters need to have, but I'm not actually interested in, because they're supposed to be in a relationship, right? And Marjory kind of pulled a dick move by running off into this incredibly risky scenario of being around Lazarus, an ancient Massart, potentially, and not even consulting Kasmeer about it. And I mean, Kasmeer's got a point to be upset, and this does feel like the kind of conversation people would have. I just don't really care about watching conversations like this. And also, for what it's worth, I would say I'm on Kasmeer's side here. Marjory says, "Oh, I didn't have time to message you," to which Kasmeer says,
Taimi has communicators.
You know what I mean.
and Kasmeer's totally right. Marjory doesn't have an excuse. She could have totally said, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this thing via Taimi if she had to. But hey, that's basically what goes on there. And it seems, especially from what we see in this instance of the second, and as well some of the developer Ask Me Anything comments, there might be a bit of a fragment in these two characters' relationship going forwards that they're going to play into quite a lot. Obviously, we've been introduced to these two characters. We saw them fall in love. We had the kiss in season 1. It kind of feels like that soap opera-y thing where a TV show's ran on for too long and they've got all these couples and then eventually they need to decide to split them up for some reason. Well, I kind of have an inkling that maybe we're seeing the start of that here. But hey, all in good time. So, once we place the mirrors, Phlunt returns. But hold on, WP, I thought you said that Phlunt was leaving Rotanovus. I did. That's because as Phlunt goes to the gate, he realizes that it's disabled and everyone has been locked in. He explains that there's no way out. That's where one of the lines from the trailer comes in that Taimi says.
The gate's down?
Am I not being clear? We couldn't leave if we wanted to or not.
He's trapped us here.
Taimi, we have to get these people out to safety.
You gotta go. A Mersat / not a Mersat on the way.
Oh yes, surely you're telling the truth now.
So this was actually really cool. I did feel trapped. I did feel like there was some genuine dread here. I did feel like, oh my god, Lazarus is coming and he's a fake. We all know he's a fake. He's angry. He's coming probably because of this machine. And, you know, even Marjory's kind of betrayed his side there. So the thought that he's going to slowly march in was really well done. I liked this part of the story and I don't see anyone really talking about that.
Ah, Marjory, there you are. I'd grown used to your ever-so-pleasant company.
But so everyone's trapped, not just us, but a bunch of innocent Asura. And Phlunt, maybe for whether you like him or not, he is kind of just an innocent Asura. So we, the Goody Two-Shoes heroes, are forced to reveal the second gate out to save Phlunt and everyone else. So at this point, we reveal the big secret dragon lab by typing Taimi's password, which is Aureen, into the machine, which has got some pretty funny little flavor text there. So what's interesting about this, guys, it's obviously not that interesting on the surface. Well, what's interesting about this is I think this is natural to have happened. Don't forget, Flashpoint is the penultimate episode. And so after the next episode, we're probably not going to be hanging around Heart of Thorns areas anymore, are we? Because we're going to get a new expansion that takes us to new regions of the world. So the idea of Rata Novus being a mainstay location for a lot of story again, it can't be that for much longer. So it was only natural that either at some point in this patch or next patch, that idea of Taimi keeping this big secret from Phlunt would finally end. And so that is what happened here. I quite like that it ended at this point. It seems very natural to me, and it's a sign that maybe this is some of the last stuff we see in Rata Novus. It's actually been kind of cool, because I remember one of my criticisms of Heart of Thorns story was that there wasn't enough in Rata Novus, nowhere near enough, and then tons of Season 3 has been there. Sure, it's not been the lower levels of the city, it's not been the inner city, all those big speculation theories about Zin still being alive in the inner city or whatever, and that achievement from Heart of Thorns, none of that's ended up coming true. But at least that room has had a lot of use, like in terms of gameplay as well, flying around to get the mirrors. Later on, there's a side objective in this very instance where you can fly around on the updrafts to get sprinklers, all the different fights we've had there. I think they've used it quite well. But for the purpose of this story, it means that Phlunt now knows about the secret dragon lab, and they're gonna try and escape. Just as this happens, as Phlunt leaves the scene again, Lazarus enters.
Lazarus, I don't recall inviting you here. I suggest you leave.
But my friends and I just arrived. I'd heard there was a machine here. A machine that could kill 2 elder dragons with one blow.
Oh, what a freaky voice. This is what scares Phlunt off here. I've really warmed to Lazarus' design, by the way. When I first saw him in episode 1, I expressed a little bit of disappointment, but seeing him floating here, how huge he is, how menacing the guy is, I would say it's definitely recaptured some of that Guild Wars 1 magic that I never quite gave credit to before. So you'll notice he's got mercenaries with him, and in fact this is mentioned in the story. He has mercs. So in the Ask Me Anything with the developers, they point out that these mercenaries supposedly have white mantle stuff, or it looks like they've looted a bunch of white mantle. That I'm really not too sure I can see evidence of. One of the mercs looks very clearly Inquest. They look generally piratey. You might be wondering, why does Lazarus have mercenaries? And we'll come back to this question in a second when we find out who the real Lazarus is. But the idea is that now we know he's not a real Massart, he can't really coax the White Mantle to work for him anymore. The White Mantle only care about the Massart, and if he's not one, well, then maybe he has to cut ties with them, as Marjory explains he does, and just get some regular mercs that you can pay to work with him. So this has drawn a lot of criticism as well, the fact he has mercs, but I don't think it's so much that he's got rid of the White Mantle, it's more his choice of mercenaries, and maybe a bit of a missed opportunity. But so Lazarus clarifies in his very sinister, weird way that he had heard there was a machine that could kill 2 elder dragons with one blow, and he's disappointed we didn't let him in on it. So we of course know that this is going on. We bait him into the center of the mirrors. They give us this very cool like ground target, this tell that I don't think we really see in many other places in the game. We walk in there and he realizes he's fallen into a trap. Right as he does it, Kasmeer like summons a bunch of phantasms, shatters them. He calls us fools.
What is this?
I know you're an imposter. Show yourself!
Fools! Destroy the mirrors!
As in, you're a fool for revealing who I truly am, which is some interesting things to think about for in a moment. And he starts fighting us. So we have to essentially defend some golems at this point in our first little fight as they repair the mirrors so that this ritual, shall we say, can be concluded. And you'll notice here that just like in the trailer for Flashpoint, just as the name suggests for Flashpoint, just as we go to the Fire Island Chains in Flashpoint, there's a lot of fiery stuff going on again. In fact, he's using the skill Fire Grab, the Elementalist Dagger offhand 5. So this is like a suggestion as to his true identity as he's doing this. During this moment as well, we can release all the Elder Dragon minions that are in pods in the area that Taimi had, and they'll be allied and fight with us. I really liked this. Maybe this is just my own sensibilities as a gamer, but it reminds me of that kind of experience. So many games do this well, but it reminds me of that experience. I think when I first experienced it was in Halo, where you get to actually team up with the Flood, and it's like these horrible, mindless seeming enemies are now your allies because the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and you're fighting alongside the Elder Dragons. I thought this was great, and it was kind of an optional thing that you could do too. So finally, with the fight concluded, you lure Lazarus into the middle, and we get a cutscene.
Enough of this!
What dreadful business. illusion is broken! Now I can... Balthazar!
Oof. All right, here we go. 22 minutes in, and we get to the big one. There you go, guys. That is the reveal. Lazarus, the Massart, shall we say, was not a Massart at all. It's Balthazar. So the one thing I'll quickly take us back up to here is the mercenaries. So a lot of people have been wondering, hey, why does he just have random mercenaries with him? Well, it's obvious if he's Balthazar what's going on. He has to cut ties with the White Mantle. Even in the dialogue of the instance, they say this. If the White Mantle knew who were following Lazarus, knew that Lazarus wasn't a Massart, but was one of the actual human gods who they don't like, it would make their heads explode. And so I really do like that they gave him mercenaries that weren't the White Mantle. My problem, though, is that they went with generic mercenaries instead of different factions. Now, some of you might feel that this would be too much of a tip-off early, right before the cutscene, but I would have loved it if these weren't regular mercenaries like these, but if they were Zaishan. So those people who play Guild Wars 2 might not know the Zaishan very well. The Zaishan are an order of humans who very specifically are devout followers of Balthazar, who kind of fight in his name. They were amongst the battle isles, the PvP areas of Guild Wars 1. There were Zaishan in Old Lion's Arch. And when I say Old Lion's Arch, I mean pre-Scarlet Lion's Arch. There was an area of Lion's Arch where you could see some Zaishan were building some stuff that they never ended up doing in Guild Wars 2. And the Zaishan have never really had too much of a role. Wouldn't it have been amazing if when Lazarus walked into the lab here, you saw he was among Zaishan, and some people would have immediately been tipped off and thought, oh god, there is Zaishan here, maybe it's Balthazar. But then, you know, when the final reveal came later, everyone would have been let in. I think that would have been so cool, and they kind of missed a trick there, I suppose. There is another question as to why he needs mercenaries at all, and that's a very good question. It ties into this question of why is he kind of weak? Why couldn't he just instantly kill us all? Why did he have to struggle against us with the whole mirror thing? Why did he have to use fire grab? Why can't he just instantly destroy us? Also, tying into this is, if he's Balthazar, why don't we go blind when we look at him? You're supposed to go blind when you look at gods. These are all very valid questions, and I hate to do this, guys, but there is a much more appropriate thing to talk about in the last instance, where Balthazar speaks on some things and maybe gives us a little bit more information there. So sit tight on those questions. For what it's worth, I will say I don't think it's a plot hole. I don't think it's negative. I don't think it's worthy of any criticism that Balthazar has mercenaries with him, even if they're not, you know, Zaishan or whatever, because I do see space for him to need them, even though, yeah, we've just been revealed to a human god. All right, so now that we've talked a bit about that, let's just take a moment to geek out about this, guys. It's kind of a very scary thing to me, but it's also an amazing thing that Balthazar is who we got. Balthazar really opens the door to a huge amount of stuff in the Guild Wars 2 story that felt closed for a long time. Not even in Guild Wars 1, where there was far more influence from the gods, and there was a lot more going on with the avatars of the gods, and we got to go to the realms of the gods, and we got, you know, even direct communication almost with some of the gods. Not even in Guild Wars 1, where it was all about humanity. None of the other races were playable, right? And it was nearly all about the gods. Not even in that game did we see a legit god. Or, well, Abaddon discounted and Doom discounted, I suppose. And perhaps Arachnia, if you believe the data of mine. But anyway, one of the six, okay? We never saw one of the six, as they were actually one of the six. So it's really crazy that they've put Balthazar here. It's something that I'm really excited about, because as a GW1 fan, I guess, maybe it's just because of the sheer amount of world building they've had, I'm a big fan of the human stuff. I'm a big fan of what the human have been built on, of a lot of those storylines that we had way back in the first game. Obviously, Heart of Thorns was very much slanted towards the Sylvari, and maybe this development here suggests that the next expansion is kind of slanted towards a lot of human stuff, because this suggests that not only Balthazar, one of the gods, this is a height that the game's gone to now, that not even GW1 went to. Not only Balthazar is here, but maybe some of the other gods have got an opportunity to arrive too. So this is really huge, as any embedded, you know, decades-long Guild Wars fan, it's kind of crazy for Balthazar to be in the story. And for all those reasons, I'm very excited. I'm also very scared. I'm very scared that they could mess it up. I'm very scared that it won't live up to my massive expectations. The gods are one of those things that I've always loved as a part of the world building, but I've always also thought that maybe shouldn't be directly talked about. Maybe they exist better as enigmas. Maybe they exist better when they are just, you know, legends and things from the past for us to mull over. Maybe they work better when they are inscrutable, and Lissa, for example, more so than any of the others. To actually take one of these entities and plop them in the game, in cutscenes and so forth, is kind of a really big risk. And so it scares me. It scares the hell out of me. And I have to say, even though there were some cool things in this patch, I already feel like they've started missing some tricks. So let's talk about missed trick first. And let's talk about the fact that they made this a twist reveal in the first place. So there was a lot of hype around this release. A lot of it very quickly sort of torpedoed into, oh my god, who's Lazarus? Who's Lazarus? Who's Lazarus? Who's Lazarus? And the way that the devs dealt with this is quite unlike the way they deal with a lot of the other mysteries in Guild Wars. And that's that they didn't breadcrumb it, really. They didn't trail us into it very well. They didn't give us many opportunities to speculate and come to the correct conclusion. Now, I'm saying this as someone who did speculate it could be Balthazar in the trailer that it came out. But honestly, aside from the fact that it was probably only one of the human gods that was strong enough that could have absorbed the power of a bloodstone, and stuff that existed outside of the game, like for example, the Balthazar theories became a lot more interesting as soon as they released a trailer with fire in it. But aside from the stuff outside of the game, there really weren't, in my opinion, enough breadcrumbs to lead us to Balthazar. And maybe the devs were deliberate about that because they wanted to finally do a big twist reveal. You know, for a lot of us, it wasn't a twist reveal that Morgemoth existed. For a lot of us, it wasn't a twist reveal that the Sylvari were under Morgemoth's influence or whatever, because they had breadcrumbs so well. And maybe they were just desperate to catch people like me and those of us who are really embedded out. But I think that might have backfired a little bit, because the result to me wasn't that I looked back M. Night Shyamalan, The Sixth Sense style, and saw all of these awesome little clues that I'd missed otherwise. It just feels a bit hollow and a bit weird more than anything that suddenly Balthazar is there. And I think this is translated into a lot of people thinking that Guild Wars 2's got a bit of a problem with exposition, in that it doesn't describe things well enough. And particularly, I imagine that a lot of GW2 only players feel very much on the out. Like, say you only bought the game with Heart of Thorns, you made a Sylvari because your friend recommended the Sylvari for Heart of Thorns, which would be a reasonable thing to do. You played a bit of personal story before then using your level 80 booster, and then you went Season 2 at Heart of Thorns Season 3. If you're that player, even if you watch me, right, or you engage on a deeper level with the game in any form, you still might not care or know that much about Balthazar. So this reveal might feel like you've missed out on something big that other people have really got to revel in. To that, I would say maybe it's not so big a deal. I don't think this has to be a crazy mind-blow twist for absolutely everyone. And to the devs' credit, there is, at the end of the instance, if you go to like a side area, when most people wouldn't if they're just rushing their way through, if you go to a side area, you can hear the Asura who aren't in the loop, Asura who don't know who Balthazar is, speculating, saying, oh my god, I think that's one of the human gods, and kind of voicing those opinions that the people who don't feel like they're in the loop would also have.
What just happened?
I think that was one of the mist beings worshipped by humans. Maybe?
Balthazar, god of war. I did my racial studies thesis on him. Never thought I'd get a chance to see him.
He took Taimi's device. What's she going to do now?
I'm just glad we survived the encounter.
And so I do think there is a little bit of exposition there, but the actual decision to make Balthazar a twist reveal, I'm not sure whether that's what I really wanted. I think they should have teased this better. They could have teased it with stuff like the Zaician. There could have been a mention that, you know, way back at the end of Heart of Thorns, in current events at some point, or in one of the first episodes, there could have been a very vague little mention that people have noticed ships around where the battle isles once were, or currently are, depending on whether you believe they're still flooded or not. That's it. That's all they'd have to do, but then that would have been some actual breadcrumbing. This thing with the mirror maybe could have been set up a little bit earlier. The Zaician being there instead of mercenaries might be of too much of a show of the hand, but that was at the last hour anyway, and could have been quite nice. And you think back as well, right? Balthazar has a lot of lore, a lot of different things that the devs could have done to do just a bit better at graining us into this. So Balthazar is, out of all the 6, I would actually say one of the gods with the most depth. Maybe only Grenth really comes close. And this is because obviously we get to go to their realms. But Balthazar has a demigod half-brother, Menzies, who he's eternally at war with. We could have had a brief mention about Menzies. We could have had something going on at the Balthazar Temple in Heart of Thorns. That's in Auric Basin, right? There could have been a bit more to tease it. There is some suggestion that maybe they were teasing it in the personal story way back when, but I don't sincerely believe in any part of me that they knew where the story was going this detailed way back then. Any of the patches, they could have done something to do with the Shadow Army or the Eternals, or they could have mentioned the Fissure of Woe somehow. Even in the most minor and seemingly irrelevant of ways, it would have at least built to something more to latch onto. But with this Lazarus reveal, they seem to have deliberately not done that because they wanted it to be a big crazy twist. And, well, I don't know how much that really paid off for me, as I say. There is something else to consider a bit more in their court as well. Perhaps it's a bit of a catch-22, and I have seen some people express this, and I think that they're right to. Like, it seems to always land on one way or the other with our community. Either there's way too much breadcrumbing and teasing and hinting, even if they do a tiny little bit, like that we knew that Morgemoth was called Morgemoth, right? Before he was ever really announced, just because of a single skill cast by a single boss in a single dungeon, and you had to look at the combat log to see the name of the skill. And even then you could only infer, but we did it and we found out the name of the dragon, and then the name of the dragon wasn't like a big twist surprise or whatever. So it's either, it feels a bit like a catch-22, where if they'd done any more than they did, we all would have known, shall we say, that it was Balthazar. Or if they do none, then on the other hand, now they have people upset that, you know, it feels too left field or too out of the way. I'm interested to see what you guys think. Is there a happy middle ground? Do you feel like this was a nice little surprise for you? I have to say, for me, I do think it was a little bit hollow. Back to Balthazar himself. Here's another little trick that I think they missed, and I don't want this video to be too negative, by the way, because I will reiterate, this blows the door wide open for all the different stories we can do. A lot of us have been waiting for the gods to be a thing in the story, or have ruminated on what potentially they could do in the story, and it looks like we're actually going there, right? So let's talk a bit about his visual design, and this is the other thing that kind of upset me, the trick that I feel like they might have missed. And I have to be very careful not to sound just like I did back in episode 1, where they gave us Lazarus, and I was a bit disappointed in how he looked. Maybe I'm just impossible to satisfy, but there is something more to this. See, in GW1, we had a lot of stuff to do with the gods, and there was this aspect to them, this inscrutable, this unknowable element to their character, right? And in GW1, we had 3 different continents we could go to: Tyria, Cantha, and Elona. In one of the most magical, awesome things that they did in the world building, in my opinion, for the first game, was they expressed that because the Canthans have a very different culture and memory and stories and ways of understanding the gods to the Elonans, to the Tyrians, that in each of these different areas of the world, the understanding of who the 6 were and what they looked like was very different. So if you asked a Canthan 250 years ago, what does Balthazar look like? The Canthan would give you an image or a sculpture or something that looks totally different to what the Elonan would give you, that looks totally different to what the Tyrian would give you. And it gives this sense that no one really knows what the gods are like. This later got paired with a really beautiful poetic story about Malkor when Guild Wars 2 came out. This idea that you couldn't even look at the gods. So look at the god was to be like looking at a star, and you would go blind if you did it. And so there was this man who would snatch the tiniest of glances and try his best to approximate what they look like from memory, and those may be the closest depictions of the gods we ever got. And then over the next 1,000 years, they warped and changed as cultures passed things around to what we eventually thought Balthazar looked like in Guild Wars 2, and the statues we find of him in Guild Wars 2. And so then, for in this reveal, to Balthazar come out and look exactly like the Tyrian interpretation of Balthazar, like down to a T, perfectly typical, it wins him, it guts him and the rest of the gods of that mysterious element that they had in the world building for years in this franchise up until this patch, and I find that really unfortunate. It suggests now that we know exactly what Dwayna looks like too. Oh, she's that blue winged character, there's no question about it. We know exactly what Grenth looked like. This wasn't always the case. Abaddon, for example, had tons of different interpretations of different ways he would look, and you could speculate over what his armor looked like as it was floating around, over the mural that you would find in Gandara, or over how he ultimately looked when he was imprisoned in the Realm of Torment. None of that speculation's really there anymore. None of that unknowableness seems to really be there anymore. Now, I appreciate fully that for this big twist reveal, they kind of had to make Balthazar look exactly like Balthazar so that it would click in people's minds and it would make sense for Kasmeer to react in the way that she does. But again, this is to me just another reason why this shouldn't have been a snap reveal. I would have liked it so much more if Balthazar just looked somehow different to what we expected. I honestly do feel I would have been more happy with his visual design if he'd come out looking like a beetle than exactly as expected. Okay, maybe not like a beetle, but you guys get what I mean. A big Norn in fiery armor didn't exactly tickle the part of my brain I was hoping to be tickled. Maybe that's just a very deep-seated thing for me, I get it. Don't take it as too sincere of a criticism, because I know a lot of you guys won't share it. But so that's Balthazar. I've already mentioned a couple of times that this is huge. It can open the story in a lot of different ways. I will do a dedicated video summing up all of the Balthazar lore we know at a more appropriate time. But this could do a lot of cool different things for the expansion, and at least with that, I'm happy. And if any of the gods would come down to Tyria, I think Balthazar is probably one of the best ones they could have done. So sticking with this big reveal, the reveal actually works from two ends. Number one, we have the reveal that the gods are going to be a part of the story and all that crazy good juicy stuff. But second, we have another thing that happens, something a bit more subtle, something people won't really have been thinking about, and something I believe the devs have almost explicitly told us is going on through Marjory's dialogue at the end of the instance. And that's this fact that the Masat and the White Mantle stuff in Guild Wars 2 is probably done, if not for forever, for quite a long while. So Lazarus never really did get revived, as we suspected. We haven't ever seen a Masat in Guild Wars 2, and anything that really Lazarus, or as we now call him, Balthazar, was doing, we don't credit to anything to do with how Masat act or feel or think or any of that stuff, because none of it was true. And this is actually really cool to me. I quite like this, because where now suddenly it feels like a lot of mystery has been winded away from the god stuff, it's actually put a lot more back onto the Masat. Now, if you look at what we've learned through all these recent releases, through the raids and everything, it's actually very little. We've seen the Eye of Janthir move around ominously before disappearing, and that's been more stuff. We got some information about the Masat and a potential alliance with the Forgotten in Rising Flames at some of their ruins in the Caliph Steppes, but outside of that, nothing really. Nothing else has really happened with the Masat. Those big ancient races are still just as mysterious as they ever were before, and that restoration to that place I've actually really liked. And equally with the Masat, you've got to look at the White Mantle too. And so the White Mantle have been kind of established as a part of this world, and maybe some territory the story will go in since the personal story. You guys will remember in Season 2 where we had the Silver Waste come out and there were these cryptic messages of new Kryta, and then we had the raid, and we've had tons of White Mantle stuff. Essentially another civil war in Kryta, and that story I feel really has also come to its conclusion here. I think that the White Mantle are kind of done for Guild Wars 2 now, and I think that that's kind of one of the defining aspects of this season, that it was kind of the White Mantle season. It culminated with that attack on Divinity's Reach, and you know what, I'm happy with that as well, because where else logically do the writers take that story now? There aren't too many more angles, there's not too many other ways that they can escalate it. If Lazarus isn't there, the White Mantle have been guided, they've had their leader killed, that's like both halves done now. Even Saul D'Alessio's story was resolved in the raid, and he's been buried, and aside from the Eye of Janthir moving away and the Masat stuff left to talk about, perhaps way down the line, I think that's actually really comfortably been finished, and I think that's been nice to see. It's been really cool. In this one moment, this one cutscene, you suddenly see a big shift happen in what stories Guild Wars 2 are actually trying to tell us. I suppose there is, by the way, and this is also something that Marjory talks about at the end of the instance, and I give the devs credit for doing this too. There's also the potential for this Horcrux thing to come forward. Maybe I'm wrong about the idea that the Masat are stepping away, and maybe we actually want to find the real Lazarus now. Maybe we want to find the real Horcruxes, put the real Horcruxes to get together and do the actual ritual, if that's still even a possibility. I don't know whether the devs will do this. I think a lot of people think this would be very cheesy. The idea that, oh no, there's a god to fight. How do we fight a god? Well, we need the real Lazarus, obviously. I don't know whether they will end up going that direction. It does feel like it would be a bit cheesy, but it's funny to think that those set pieces, those Horcruxes are still there, and maybe 20 years from now, if ArenaNet is still going, we'll find, you know, a storyline where people pick up those Horcruxes and something happens again. I do think the Isles of Janthir, and I do think the Eye and stuff will be a thing, but maybe that's been set to the side for now. I mean, maybe I quite like that. And I especially like that the devs know we're thinking about these things and gave us an outlet to express them through Marjory in the patch itself. It's so important, I think, you speak to Marjory at the end, and it's a real shame that all that dialogue is actually missable. Great. So, the other thing, obviously, that happens in the cutscene is we have Kasmeer's reaction to it. She screams, he's one of the 6, and starts hiccuping. I love seeing it when she starts hiccuping. It's kind of a big part of her character, right? We know she's nervous. We know she's totally set on tilt because of this. She bows down to him. Lazarus explains, or Balthazar explains, that he will have the machine. He teleports off.
Could it really be Balthazar?
It is. He dropped the lie. And his mirror. It was special. Enchanted by Lissa herself.
And now he has my machine. What are your gods doing, Kasmeer?
She actually then just flees very quickly afterwards. In her moment, she falters. Marjory is struck, and Kasmeer runs away. And so the Ask Me Anything from the developers and also the dialogue from Marjory here suggests to me that with all these cool new things that are going on, there's also something I'm not that interested in seeing. And I think it is this idea that Marjory and Kasmeer are going to have like this turbulent issue. There's two things really to talk about here. Kasmeer cares a lot about the gods. She prays to the gods. Marjory explains, look, Kasmeer really cares about the gods, and I sort of didn't so much. And so I can't believe that Kasmeer, you know, let her guard down like that. And Marjory's really offended that Kasmeer would do this. So what I'm not interested in is relationship drama between these two characters. I'm not interested in seeing them having a falling out because, you know, they feel betrayed by one another in these various ways. Kasmeer feels betrayed because Marjory left and didn't consult her. Marjory feels betrayed because Kasmeer didn't protect her. All these things. I don't like those. I'm not very interested in that. But the thing I really am interested in is this general theme, this general story of the humans finding their faith again. So, as I explained, Guild Wars 1 was very much about the humans and about the gods, and everyone had faith in the gods, because why wouldn't they? The avatars were around, they were shown to be present. But between GW1 and 2, the gods have been gone. They're absent, they're not around. And so many humans actually have been losing their faith. This has been a big bit of the Guild Wars 2 world building. The fact that humans don't really know where they stand with the gods anymore. And it's been a cool and interesting idea that was never properly touched on by the main story until now. And so I am interested in that. I'm interested in Kasmeer representing all the humans who loved the gods and how they'll react to the fact a frickin' god is back on Tyria, and Marjory representing all those other humans who have decided, yeah, I don't really care about them, and started taking more of the Asura or Char point of view, or maybe even Norn if you like, which is that, you know, they're just powerful entities and why call them gods, which is essentially the way I think a lot of the player base should be thinking of these, and has actually dawned for the first time on a lot of the player base, which, you know, it's been, I think, something most of us have been clued in on for a long time if we've been paying a lot of attention. So this I am interested in. I am interested in the game going into this direction of which humans have found their faith. And it makes me think of in Heart of Thorns, you know, it was very Sylvari leaning, and you'd have those Sylvari you'd walk up to in the jungle and they say, nobody trusts me anymore. That was really cool. I loved the atmosphere that built up, and the thought that in the next episode, and indeed the expansion following it, there could be a lot of similar stuff going on, but with human dialogue instead, as the humans are having a bit of a crisis of heart. I think that would be pretty wonderful. So I am very excited. I just hope that the whole Marjory and Kasmeer breakup, boo-hoo stuff doesn't bog the story down too much. Moving back as well to a little comment from Kasmeer. It's mentioned this mirror again, this mirror that Balthazar had with him. It suggested that this Balthazar was probably from Lissa or enchanted by Lissa herself. So there's some suggestion here that my favorite god, Lissa, might actually have something to do with the story here. I guess we'll come more to this discussion later, but it seems like Balthazar is kind of acting rogue, and the question is Lissa in cahoots with him, or was the mirror stolen? I kind of lean on the side that the mirror might have been stolen for now, but it's kind of cool to hear about some of the other gods and what they've been doing too. The other kind of small nitpick that I have to make around this time that I think a lot of people will agree with me on is an unfortunate thing that this patch didn't do very well, that last patch did incredibly. While this patch we had the cool ferocity, charm, dignity thing, they didn't do any personal story related, or rather race related, dialogue. And that sucks. So last patch, what they did so well with the war in Kryta, okay, is they looked back at what your character had done in the past on Tyria, and they had loads of different dialogue that drew on that. That if you had done the dungeon before, then your character would comment there. If you were a ranger, you might have something specific to do. If you were an engineer, you might have something specific to do. In the raid, if you were a human that had been in prison, you might have a certain comment. If you were a char, you might have a certain comment. This was all brilliant, and it was in spades. If ever they needed to do more of that, wasn't it right here at the reveal of Balthazar as a god? Especially considering A, you can be a human who may care about the gods, but B, one of the biography choices for being a human is to say that you were blessed at birth by Balthazar. And some people picked that. And now here they are in Flashpoint seeing Balthazar, and their character doesn't express anything. Balthazar doesn't express anything. That really needed to be there. And the double disappointment that comes from this as well, a double whammy for me, is that part of the biography where you get to choose which god blessed you is really one of the most arbitrary, useless biography decisions you can make in Guild Wars 2 that affects so little stuff. A little bit of Queensdale dialogue and the affects like one character in your home instance. That's it. It's such a useless choice, and this was ArenaNet's opportunity to redeem that choice in the biography, make it worth something finally, and satisfy a bunch of players at the same time with race-specific dialogue that they'd already shown they were nailing as of the recent patches, and all of a sudden that's evaporated here for the Balthazar instance. Perhaps this is a consequence of having separate teams doing separate living world stuff and they don't learn from one another quick enough, but man, what a shame. I at least was playing an Asura, and it didn't feel too out of place the way my character acted, but if you're like a solo human person, I get the frustration, believe me, I really do. So, back to the point of Lazarus leaving, the fact he called us fools, remember this? Now think about that, recontextualize that with the fact that he's a god calling us fools. There's definitely an element in Flashpoint in this instance and the ones coming up where I think we have to be questioning, is Balthazar right to call us a fool? Maybe he is correct in what he's doing. He seems a bit crazy. He seems to not really care about us. He outright attempts to kill all of us in Rata Novus here, and that includes several humans, which already suggests that he doesn't care very much about Tyria, and that will be pushed to new heights a little bit later in the next instance. He says, "See that no one lives, this tires me, and the dragons call." So is he just totally blindsided? Does he not care about us? But why are we fools for trying to stop him? Does he have an alternate agenda? And I think that's something more that we'll be looking at later. It's kind of interesting. It reminds me of Ara. It reminds me of Or. It reminds me of the god temples and where we would find the risen priests, right? That were corrupted by Zaitan. They had been turned by the gods, and they had been talking about how the gods themselves may have fallen or been corrupted. And back then, we just assumed that those were Zaitan lies, but maybe there's something more going on here, and Balthazar is actually exhibiting it. Maybe that, again, is a theory and something we'll be talking about later. So, millions of mercenaries flood into the room. Tons and tons and tons of them. And this, honestly, was one of my favorite things. The Balthazar stuff spells a lot of cool stuff for the story. Felt a tiny bit hollow to me, but I love this moment of this instance. There are tons of mercenaries. You guys might recall I've complained about Guild Wars 2 several times before in that it can't quite tap into that GW1 feeling we had of just hordes of enemy, tons of red dots on your compass, and crazy aggro management. The devs never really flooded billions of mobs into an encounter before, or if they did, it was rarely or because of very highly upscaled meta events. Well, right here in this instance, you are overwhelmed by mercenaries, and it's brilliant. And do you know what's even more brilliant? The return of Phlunt riding to your side like Gandalf at dawn, coming from behind you with all of these golems, and you get equal numbers to have this massive fight against all of these mercenaries. It really pairs this huge lore bomb reveal with actually a pretty big gameplay experience as well, where there's just tons of things to fight and charge around and kill. It's great. And what does this mean for Phlunt as well? I mentioned at the start of this video that I love the direction Phlunt goes in. Phlunt's an arsehole. Phlunt's a douche. He never seems to be anything more than self-interested, but at least here, Phlunt is being a hero, and there's something about that I enjoy so much. You know, these really mean, cruel people that nonetheless redeem themselves and get down to business when they have to. And so we fight alongside Phlunt, who never fled for his life, but came, and we destroy all of the mercs. And that's basically how the patch ends, really, there, guys, with Kasmeer fleeing. We have no idea where she went. With Marjory hurt, though I hope that she's probably going to be okay. Marjory's got a bit of a thing for getting hurt at the moment, actually. And with us having a conversation with Taimi about what the hell just happened, what Balthazar might be doing with the machine, and drawing on what Marjory had mentioned about a base on the Fire Islands that Balthazar had set up, and the fact he is the god of fire, and the fact he's got the machine and cares about these two elder dragons, that perhaps Balthazar has made his way to the Fire Island chain. And what do we do now? Well, we hunt him down to his base in the Fire Islands on top of Primordus. And believe me, if you think that this patch has already done some crazy stuff, it gets a hell of a lot crazier right there. I wasn't joking when I said I feel like this episode is really expansion territory more than living world territory. I'll see you for that one.